On today's installment of INC Short Tips, I'm going to discuss fiber media converters. A fiber media converter is essentially a piece of hardware that is going to convert fiber optic to copper. We're talking about a piece of hardware that exists in your control system. It has power, and it essentially converts one media, communication media, to another communication media. One of the most sought after reasons why you would use a fiber media converter and fiber optic is you're concerned about distance. So typically there's limitations on copper, whether it be serial or Ethernet communications, on distances. For example, with Ethernet you can only typically go about 330 feet or 100 meters without requiring some other type of hardware in order to extend that distance. But fiber optic, typically, depending on the type of fiber optic, whether it's single mode or multi-mode, you're talking about distances on the order of miles. The second one would be you're concerned over noise or interference, and this could be electromagnetic interference or it could be radio frequency type interference. But essentially, you're wanting some isolation from potential noise. Maybe you're in a very high electrical environment and therefore want some protection against noise that could occur on your communication lines. The other reasons why you might use fiber optic would be you've got an application or a network that requires a lot of bandwidth, or you need to move a lot of data between point A and point B. So fiber optic has a very large capacity compared to copper. There are a number of companies out there that specialize or offer products that are related to industrial fiber media conversion. These are companies like Moxa or Entron or Garrettcom, which is owned by Belden. A couple others are Hirschman or perhaps RuggedCom by Siemens. So a couple considerations that go into selecting your fiber media converter. The first thing is you're going to want to understand what type of fiber optic are we talking about. Is this single mode or multi-mode? Secondly, you're going to want to understand a little bit about what's happening on the copper side. And when I say copper, certainly you have choices like Ethernet, serial, and then you could have what I would call specialty type copper networks. Understanding a little bit about your conversion in terms of your physical fiber optic network to your physical copper network is important, because that's going to narrow down the scope of possible suppliers of fiber media converters. Most fiber media converters are going to be focused around Ethernet and serial. You're going to have much more limited selection when it comes to these specialty networks. And the reason why they're called out separately is typically because some of these field buses here have electrical characteristics on their copper networks that are different from serial and Ethernet. The other thing that's going to be very important in your selection is going to be understanding your environment. The more extreme your environment, the more expensive the products. Understanding a little bit about the environment in terms of whether it's protected from dust is another criteria that would be required or should be evaluated in selecting a media converter. But temperature range is by far probably the most significant parameter when looking at the environment. The other thing that is going to be driving your selection of your media converter is your power supply. You know, in the case of a lot of electrical substations, we see 48 and 125 volt DC versus, say, 24 volt DC, which we would see in a lot of industrial process control applications. The other aspect is, do you want your power supply to be built into the media converter? So do you want your power supply to be integral to the hardware versus external? in terms of wire management and organizing your panel or organizing the enclosure where you're going to have the power supply, you'll certainly want to make that determination as to whether you want your power supply to be internal to the media converter or do you want it to be external. Typically, if you're dealing with these types of applications here, I would say definitely these, you're going to see it's going to be an internal power supply. And when you're dealing with 24 volt 120 or 24 volt AC, that could be an external. Another aspect that you're going to want to consider when you evaluate or need to select a fiber optic media converter is the mounting configuration. And that's important because not all fiber media converters support or easily support rack mount. A lot of fiber media converters certainly are meant to be panel mounted or DIN rail mounted within a panel. However, there are a select few manufacturers who offer an option where you can buy a chassis. So this would be a rack mount chassis. I know specifically Garrett Com offers that. Moxa as well offers the ability to have an arrangement where you mount a chassis within a rack and then your media converters plug into that chassis. So it's a nice solution for when you want to put media converters within a rack mount configuration. One of the things that is popular nowadays is having a switch, an Ethernet switch, and within that you have your copper ports, but you also have what's called 1 or 2, and these are called either GBIC or Sfp modules. They're little modules that essentially have fiber optic within them and they plug into your switch. What it does, it allows you to save a little bit of space and consolidate your conversion to within a switch. So essentially these would be copper, you know, again your copper interface, and then you can add to that switch a small device that will plug into that switch and essentially add a fiber media connection. If you're dealing with within the computer or in a rack mount configuration, a lot of times it's easy to get a switch or a router that is already rack mountable, and therefore adding fiber optic to it is easy as just buying typically nowadays an Sfp module. That's it for today. I hope you found today's installment on fiber media converter and how to select and specify a fiber media converter helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us via email or call me. I'll be glad to help.